The mansion stood in complete silence, its walls echoing a sadness that had seeped into every corner since the death of the lady of the house. Once filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of family life, it had now become a cold monument to grief. The millionaire, known for his sharp mind and colder heart, walked its endless corridors like a shadow of his former self. But the deepest wound did not belong to him. It belonged to his young son, a child barely 3 years old, who had lost not only his mother but also his light, his comfort, and his will to reach out to anyone. The boy refused every hand that tried to hold him, every smile that tried to touch him. The household had gone through nannies, governesses, and nurses, each more qualified than the last, each leaving after a few days, unable to handle the piercing screams and heartbreaking sobs that came every time someone approached him. The little boy's cries filled the house, day and night, like the echo of a broken soul. Trapped inside a child's body, his father tried everything, expensive toys, doctors, specialists, therapists, but nothing worked. The boy would sit for hours by the large window of the nursery, staring out at the gardens, clutching the small blanket that once belonged to his mother. His eyes, so blue and full of sorrow, seemed far older than his years. The staff whispered among themselves that the boy was cursed, that grief had stolen his voice, his laughter, and maybe even his will to live. The millionaire refused to believe that. Yet deep down, he knew his own wealth and power meant nothing before the pain of his son. He had built an empire of gold and stone, but he could not rebuild the small, shattered heart of his child. It was during one of those hopeless days that she arrived, a woman no one paid attention to at first. Her name was Eleanor, a humble cleaning woman from a nearby town. She had come to replace one of the maids who had left without warning, frightened by the atmosphere. In the mansion, she was small in stature, with gentle hands roughened by years of hard work. Her eyes carried something rare, a calm light that came from a life of quiet endurance and simple faith. She didn't ask questions. She came, cleaned, and left without speaking much. At first, no one imagined she would have any place in the story of the child who wouldn't be touched. But destiny has its own way of weaving miracles through the most ordinary lives. One evening, as rain lashed against the tall windows, the child's cries echoed through the corridors once again. The nannies had long given up trying to comfort him. The father was away on business, and the servant stood helpless at the door of the nursery, afraid to enter. That's when Elena, carrying her cleaning cloths and bucket, walked by. She stopped, listening. The sound broke something deep inside her. It wasn't just the cry of a child. It was the cry of a soul, abandoned in darkness. Without hesitation, she put down her things and opened the door. The boy sat in the corner of the nursery, clutching his blanket, tears streaming down his cheeks, trembling as if the world itself had betrayed him. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out. She simply sat down on the floor a few feet away from him, silently. Minutes passed. The rain softened outside. The boy looked at her once, then again, curious but cautious. She didn't try to move closer. Instead, she began to hum, a soft, broken lullaby she used to sing to her own child, one she had lost years ago. Her voice trembled at first, but soon filled the room with something unfamiliar to that cold house. Warmth. The boy stopped crying. His breathing slowed. His eyes, still red from tears, lifted toward the sound. The lullaby carried memories of tenderness, of something he thought was gone forever. Slowly he crawled closer. Elena didn't move, afraid to break the fragile moment. And then, for the first time in months, the child rested his head gently on someone's knee. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, the impossible had happened. The boy, who had rejected every touch, had accepted the presence of a woman no one believed could matter. From that moment, something began to change in the mansion. The air felt different. The servants whispered that the child had finally found peace, but no one understood how or why. Only Elena knew that sometimes love doesn't come through wealth or words or even care. It comes through the silent courage of being there when no one else dares to stay. And though she didn't know it yet, this small act of compassion would soon shake the life of the millionaire himself, forcing him to confront everything he thought he understood about love, pride, and what truly matters. Days turned into weeks, and something imperceptible began to stir within the mansion's walls. It wasn't just silence anymore, it was a different kind of silence. Softer, almost alive. The echoes of the boy's cries, once constant like a haunting melody, began to fade into the distance. Servants whispered in disbelief. The child who used to scream for hours, who refused to be touched, who trembled even at the sound of footsteps, was changing. It started with small things. One morning, the head maid walked past the nursery and froze. Through the half-open door, she saw the boy sitting on the carpet, surrounded by wooden blocks. He wasn't crying. He wasn't staring out the window. He was humming softly, a tune she didn't recognize. But that sent chills through her spine. It was Elena's lullaby. Word spread quickly through the household like a secret no one dared to speak too loudly. The boy had accepted the cleaning woman, the one no one noticed, the one who came quietly, with no fine clothes, no education, no titles, just a heart full of something the mansion had forgotten how to hold. Compassion. Elena never tried to take anyone's place. She continued her chores as before, moving silently from room to room, dusting, sweeping, tending to the house, as if it were a fragile living being. But every afternoon, after finishing her work, she would pass by the nursery. The boy would be there, waiting. He would look up from his toys, eyes lighting up just a little, and she would sit near him, never too close at first, humming the same lullaby that had once eased his pain. Sometimes she would bring him a piece of bread she had baked at home, or a small carved wooden toy. Nothing expensive, but given with tenderness. Those moments, the child smiled. It was faint at first, a hesitant flicker like sunlight breaking through clouds, but soon it grew stronger. His small hands began to reach for hers. He started to follow her down the hallways, clinging to the edge of her apron as she worked. The mansion that had once been filled with coldness and grief now seemed to breathe again, as if touched by something holy. When the millionaire returned from one of his business trips, the change struck him like a storm. He had expected to come home to the same silence, to the same sorrowful eyes of his child, but instead he found his son laughing, a sound he hadn't heard since his wife's funeral. The boy's tiny voice echoed through the corridors like music resurrected from the dead. The father froze in the doorway of the nursery, disbelief etched into his face. His son was sitting on the floor with Elena, building towers out of wooden blocks. She was laughing too, softly, her voice warm and human in a way the mansion hadn't known for years. The boy clapped his hands as the tower fell, then looked up at her for approval, not for fear. The millionaire's heart twisted inside him. Part of him wanted to weep. Another part wanted to rage. How could this woman, this simple cleaning lady, accomplish what all the doctors and nannies had failed to do? What secret did she hold? He didn't speak to her that day. He stood in silence, watching, feeling emotions he didn't know how to name. Guilt, perhaps. Envy, even. For so long he had lived believing that love could be bought, that happiness was built with wealth and control. And yet, in front of him, a woman of no fortune and no name had done the impossible. She had brought life back into his home. That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked the halls, the echo of his footsteps mingling with the faint lullaby that drifted from the nursery. It was the same song that had once lulled his son into peace. Now, softly filling the air again, he leaned against the wall, eyes closed, letting the melody sink into his chest like a forgotten prayer. It was beautiful, painfully beautiful. The next morning he ordered the head butler to summon the cleaning staff. When Eleanor stood before him, she looked nervous. Her hands clasped together, her head bowed. She didn't know what to expect, a scolding perhaps for spending time with the boy instead of cleaning. The millionaire's voice was calm, but heavy. "I've heard that my son allows you near him," he said. Slowly, Elena nodded, her eyes downcast. He He needed someone to listen, she whispered. Sometimes children don't need words, they need hearts. Her simplicity disarmed him. There was no pretense, no attempt to flatter or defend herself, just quiet truth. He didn't respond. He simply dismissed her with a gesture, but her words echoed in his mind long after she had gone. Sometimes children don't need words, they need hearts. From that day on, he began to observe her more closely. At first, from afar, then more openly, he watched how she spoke to his son, not as a servant to a master's child, but as a soul to another soul. He saw how the boy's eyes lit up whenever she entered the room, how laughter now replaced sobs. He noticed small changes, even in himself. The mansion no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive again because she was there. And yet, a quiet conflict brewed inside him. Part of him admired her deeply. Another part resented her for it. She reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he didn't know how to be. Weeks turned into months. The bond between Elena and the child deepened until it seemed as though fate itself had chosen her to fill a void no one else could touch. The boy began to speak again, first in whispers, then in full sentences. One afternoon, when the father came home early, he heard his son's voice calling out through the halls, laughing as he said her name, Elena. That single sound shattered something inside the man. He realized, with a pang that stole his breath, that his son had found his mother again, not in blood, but in love. And for the first time in years, the millionaire felt a tear slide down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He simply stood there, watching from a distance, as the woman he had once overlooked gave his child something he never could, the courage to love again. The seasons changed slowly, as if the mansion itself were learning to breathe again. Winter melted into a timid spring, and for the first time in years, sunlight touched the long-forgotten garden. The boy's laughter, now a daily melody, seemed to call warmth into every room. Even the servants, once cautious, whispering, afraid to make noise, walked lighter, spoke softer, smiled more. Something invisible yet powerful had shifted, and at the center of it all stood Elena. She had not asked for attention. She still wore the same modest clothes, still arrived early in the mornings and left quietly at dusk. But everywhere she went, life seemed to follow. Flowers in the hallway, once ignored, began to bloom again under her care. The kitchen, where once the cooks had prepared food in silence, now filled with the scent of bread and laughter whenever she passed by. She didn't bring riches, she brought peace. The millionaire watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and unease. He was a man used to controlling everything, his business, his image, his home. But this woman, this quiet, humble figure, had slipped into his world like a whisper of grace he could neither command nor dismiss. At first, he told himself it was gratitude. After all, she had done what no one else could. She had reached his son's heart. But the truth was far more complicated. He found himself thinking of her when she wasn't around. He noticed the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way her eyes softened when she looked at his son, the gentleness of her hands. He tried to fight it. How absurd, he thought. She was a servant, a cleaning woman, a stranger from a world that had never belonged to his. And yet, whenever she entered a room, it was as if the air itself changed, warmer, lighter, alive. One evening, as he passed by the nursery, he stopped at the door without meaning to. Inside, he saw Elena sitting by the window, humming the lullaby again. The boy lay across her lap, eyes half closed, one hand clutching her sleeve. The sunset bathed them both in gold, and for a fleeting moment, the millionaire saw something sacred in that scene, a mother and child, bound not by blood, but by something far deeper. He leaned against the doorframe, silent, almost afraid to breathe. The melody filled the room like a prayer. His chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but no words came. When Elena looked up and saw him, she froze, startled. For a moment their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them, fragile and undeniable. She lowered her gaze immediately, whispering softly, "He fell." "Asleep, sir." The man nodded. You sing beautifully," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "It's a song from my childhood," she murmured. "My mother used to sing it when the nights were long and the wind wouldn't stop crying." The words struck him, the simplicity of them, the poetry of her pain. He wanted to ask more, to know everything, who her mother was, where she came from, what life had taught her to endure. But he didn't. Instead, he just nodded and walked away, though her already at work, sweeping leaves from the path. She hadn't seen him. She moved slowly, her movements graceful, almost reverent, as if tending to something sacred. He watched for a long moment before speaking. "You work even when no one is watching." She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "That's when the work matters most," she said simply. He was silent. There was truth in her words, truth that unsettled him. For years, he had lived surrounded by people who only acted when he was looking. But this woman, she was different. He wanted to ask her 1,000 things, what she thought, what she dreamed of, but before he could, his son's voice came from the house, calling for her. The way he said her name, full of joy and trust, made the man's heart ache. As she turned to go, he said quietly, "You've done something extraordinary with my son. I can never repay you for that." She stopped, looked back at him with those calm, honest eyes, and said, "You don't owe me anything, sir. Love doesn't come in exchange for anything. It just happens." Her words hung in the air long after she had gone. He stood there alone, realizing how strange it felt to hear something so pure in a world built on bargains and power. Days passed, and his fascination grew into something he could no longer deny. He began finding excuses to cross her path, to ask questions about the house, to thank her for something trivial, to hear her voice again. She remained respectful, distant but kind, unaware of the storm she had awakened inside him. But not everyone in the mansion shared his quiet admiration. Rumors began to spread. The other servants whispered that the master was watching the cleaning woman too closely, that something forbidden was blooming where it should not. Elena heard the whispers too, though she pretended not to. Still, at night, when she returned to her small room at the edge of the property, she sometimes sat by the window and cried softly, not because she was ashamed, but because she feared what her heart was beginning to feel. She had not meant to love this world, to love the child, or worse, to feel her heart tremble at the sound of the father's voice. She reminded herself constantly of who she was, just a worker, a shadow passing through a house that was never hers. But love does not ask for permission, and slowly, without realizing it, she had become the soul of that house, the one who healed its wounds, who gave warmth to its walls, the one whose presence had turned grief into grace. The millionaire began to see her everywhere, in the kitchen light, in his son's laughter, in the silence before dawn. He began to wonder if perhaps fate had brought her not only for his child's healing, but for his own redemption. Yet even as his feelings deepened, he fought them. He told himself it was wrong, foolish, impossible. He told himself she was beneath his station, that such love would bring scandal, that people would never understand. But deep inside, a quiet truth whispered to him every time he looked into her eyes. This woman has already saved you, even if you can't admit it. And so the days passed in a delicate balance between longing and denial. She continued to serve with humility. He continued to watch, torn between admiration and restraint. And the boy, innocent and bright, became the bridge between two souls who did not yet know that destiny was already weaving their hearts together. It was a love neither of them had sought, but one that neither could escape, a love that would soon face a test neither could have imagined. The mansion, once a place of silence and sorrow, now pulsed with an unfamiliar energy. The boy's laughter had become a rhythm of life, echoing through corridors that had long been hollow. Yet beneath the warmth and small joys, tensions simmered like an unseen storm. Not everyone welcomed the change. Servants whispered in corners, gossiping about the small, modest woman who had dared to enter a world where she belonged to no one, yet had somehow captured the heart of its most precious inhabitant. They wondered what the millionaire would do when he truly understood the depth of her influence. The millionaire, for his part, was caught in a maelstrom of emotions he neither wanted to name nor understand. Every time he saw Elena with his son, his chest tightened as if constricted by invisible hands. His heart, long armored by pride, disbelief, and the cold certainty of wealth, began to stir in ways that frightened him. He told himself it was gratitude, concern, responsibility, but the truth was far more complicated. The warmth he observed, the laughter, the trust in his son's eyes, all directed toward a woman of no title, no fortune, no claim, ignited a storm of envy, admiration, fear, and longing. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mansion's spires, casting long shadows across the marble floors, the millionaire stood in the doorway of the nursery, hidden in the dim light. Inside, Elena played with his son, teaching him to stack wooden blocks higher and higher, laughing as they tumbled down. The boy's small hands moved with newfound confidence, his eyes sparkling for the first time in years. For a moment, the father forgot himself entirely, captivated by the simple, profound miracle unfolding before him. But then doubt crept in. How dare this woman, a stranger from another world entirely, step into his life and claim such influence over his son? His pride flared, a fire that burned against the soft glow of her presence. He clenched his fists, feeling anger rise like a tidal wave. She was not part of his world, not part of his plans, yet here she was, changing the very rhythm of the life he had thought he controlled. Days passed, and the tension between them grew more complex. Elena remained unaware of the effect she had, moving through the mansion with her quiet diligence, speaking only when necessary, yet radiating a power that neither money nor authority could command. She knew her place, or at least she told herself she did. She was there for the boy and nothing more. But as she tended to him, guided his tiny hands, wiped away tears, and soothed his fears, she felt the stirrings of something deeper. Her heart ached with the joy of his laughter, yet it trembled at the silent pull toward the man who had watched her from afar, whose presence shadowed her work with unspoken questions. The boy, oblivious to the adult complexities surrounding him, grew, stronger, happier, and more open to the world. Where he had once recoiled at a hand or a word, he now reached out for guidance, for comfort, for warmth. He whispered secrets only to her, smiled when she entered the room, and for the first time greeted the day with curiosity instead of fear. His laughter was no longer a fleeting sound. It became the anchor of life itself within the mansion. Yet the father's inner struggle intensified. He found himself observing them from every angle, feeling the unspoken bond between mother and child. He saw how Elena's hands guided his son's small fingers across a drawing, how her eyes glimmered when the boy said a new word, how the faintest smile lit her face when he clung to her shoulder. It was intimate, sacred, and unbearable. He told himself to look away, to assert control, to remind himself that she was merely a servant, but he could not. Every fiber of his being rebelled, both drawn to her grace and repelled by his own vulnerability. The turning point came one night during a storm that shook the mansion's foundations. The rain battered the windows with the rhythm of ancient drums. The wind howled through the gardens, and thunder echoed across the high ceilings. The boy, frightened by the violent storm, cried in terror. Elena, in an instinctive act of courage and devotion, took him in her arms, held him close, and whispered assurances that melted away his fear. Her body shielded him from the storm, her voice became a haven, and her presence transformed the darkness into light. The millionaire, drawn by the child's cries, arrived at the nursery doorway. He froze, witnessing Elena cradle his son with a tenderness that seemed to bend time itself. The boy's sobs faded as he buried his face against her chest, his small hands clutching her clothing. The father's chest constricted, and he felt something entirely new: awe, respect, an almost spiritual recognition that she had done what he could never do. He had built empires, bought comfort, mastered influence, but she had rebuilt the soul of his son. For hours he stood there, watching silently, invisible yet unavoidably present. The storm outside mirrored the storm within him: rage, fear, admiration, and something far more complicated that he dared not name. He realized in that long, trembling moment that her influence extended beyond the boy. It reached him, touched him, unsettled every certainty he had built around himself, his life, and his understanding of love. The next morning, subtle changes became apparent throughout the mansion. Servants who once whispered began to behave differently, noticing the new authority of Elena not as a threat, but as a force of nature. She moved through the halls with quiet dignity, performing her duties, but every small gesture, cleaning, arranging flowers, offering the boy a small smile, became monumental in the life of the household. The millionaire, watching from a distance, felt a shift in the air, as if the walls themselves acknowledged her power. Yet tension still lingered. Pride and social expectation tugged at him relentlessly. How could a man of his standing openly admire, or worse, feel connected to, someone of her class? And yet, every time he looked into his son's joyful eyes, every time he saw her patience and courage, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. It was not just admiration anymore. He was captivated, entranced, drawn into the quiet revolution that her presence had initiated. A humble cleaning woman, a child of sorrow, and a house of wealth and grief, all intertwined in a delicate, precarious dance of love, courage, and redemption. But as much as he wanted to approach, to speak, to reach out, he held back. He was the master of the house, yet he felt powerless. The woman's influence was no longer subtle. It was undeniable, sweeping through the mansion like an invisible tide, reshaping everything it touched. And in the quiet corners of his mind, the millionaire began to ask himself the question he had long resisted. Could it be possible that she was not merely a caretaker, but something far greater? A guide, a redeemer, a soul sent to heal what money and power never could. The house waited, breathless, for the next act of this unspoken story. The boy, the woman, the man, they were all players in a drama larger than any of them had imagined. And the turning point, the moment that would decide whether pride or love, fear or courage would. Triumph loomed closer with every passing day. The mansion, once a silent mausoleum of grief, now buzzed with the quiet tension of transformation. Each corridor, each high-ceilinged room, carried the invisible weight of change. The boy, once a shadow of sorrow, had grown bolder, brighter, his laughter like a bell ringing through the vast halls. But it was Elena, with her humble presence, who had become the true heartbeat of the household. Every small act she performed, preparing a simple meal, brushing the boy's hair, tucking him into bed, was infused with a kind of magic the mansion had never known. The millionaire observed her from a distance, initially with suspicion, but the more he watched, the more he was forced to acknowledge the depth of her influence. She did not command with authority. She did not speak with wealth or power. She commanded with something far more elusive: love. And in that love, the boy flourished. He smiled without fear. He reached out without hesitation. He even began to speak words that had been lost to grief. One afternoon, the millionaire found himself standing outside the nursery, unable to resist the pull that drew him closer. Inside, Elena was teaching the boy to paint. His small hands, once clumsy and hesitant, now moved boldly across the canvas, guided by her patient instructions. The colors were bright, chaotic, yet full of life. She watched him carefully, her eyes soft with encouragement, her lips curving into a gentle smile every time he lifted a brush with newfound confidence. The boy paused, holding up his painting, a sprawling, imaginative landscape of castles, rivers, and trees. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes shining with pride, and whispered, "Look, I made this for you." Eleanor knelt down to his level, taking his tiny hands in hers. "It's beautiful," she said softly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "You've made the world come alive." The millionaire, hidden behind the doorway, felt a jolt deep in his chest. Something shifted. His pride, his skepticism, his long-held beliefs all began to crumble. He realized with a clarity that startled him that the woman before him had done what he had never been able to do. She had healed the heart of his child, had given him a reason to love again, had brought life back into a home that had been a mausoleum of grief. He stepped into the room, quietly at first, unsure of how to speak. Elena looked up, startled, but her eyes softened when she saw him. "Sir," she said cautiously. He shook his head, unable to find words immediately. He knelt down beside his son, who turned to him with a smile that had once been impossible. "Dad," the boy said simply, "look at what I made." The millionaire nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He could barely speak. "It's incredible," he managed, his voice heavy with emotion. For the first time, he allowed himself to observe Elena fully, not just as a worker, not just as someone who had helped his son, but as a person of extraordinary heart, courage, and resilience. She was unassuming, yet every motion, every word, radiated strength and warmth. His admiration deepened, intertwining with an awareness of his own shortcomings, his own emotional absence in the life of his child. As the days passed, the millionaire found himself drawn ever closer, often without realizing it. He began to engage her in conversations, asking about her life, her family, her childhood. Each answer revealed layers of strength, patience, and wisdom, and each answer humbled him. He understood now that wealth and power could never substitute for the essence of human connection that she embodied so naturally. And then came the moment that sealed her place in their lives. One stormy night, the boy fell seriously ill. Fever raged through his small body, and his cries pierced the mansion with a raw, primal fear. The millionaire rushed through the halls, panic clawing at his chest, while Elena appeared calmly in the doorway of the nursery. Without hesitation, she took charge. Her hands moved skillfully, her voice steady and soothing, as she prepared medicine, monitored his temperature, and sang softly, never letting her composure falter. Hours passed. The boy, comforted by her presence, finally began to stabilize. The millionaire watched helplessly, awestruck. Every action she took was precise, tender, and infused with an unspoken love that transcended her humble origins. He realized, with a profound shock, that she had saved his son's life, not with wealth, not with influence, but with the sheer force of her heart. When the crisis passed and the boy finally slept peacefully, the millionaire fell to his knees beside Elena. I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. Tears filled his eyes. "I thought I could do everything for him. But you saved him." Elena shook her head, exhausted but smiling softly. "You gave him life," she said. "I only helped him remember how to love it again." From that night on, the dynamic light back into his life. Every laugh, every hug, every whispered secret was a thread weaving their lives together, forming a tapestry of trust, healing, and the quiet yet unstoppable force of love. And in the quiet moments when the mansion was still, the millionaire began to reflect on himself, his pride, his coldness, his failures. He understood that life was not about power or wealth alone. It was about heart, courage, and the willingness to open oneself to the extraordinary in the most ordinary people. Elena, through her unwavering devotion, had become not just the protector of his son, but a mirror reflecting everything he had lost and everything he could still become. He could not deny it any longer. She had conquered the heart of his child, and slowly, imperceptibly, she was conquering his as well. Every act of care, every quiet word, every small miracle she performed in that house was a declaration of love more powerful than any jewel or estate. The stage was now set. The boy thrived, The woman had proven herself indispensable, and the millionaire was on the brink of surrendering to a force far greater than he had ever imagined. The mansion, once a tomb of grief and wealth, had become a living testament to transformation, courage, and the quiet, unstoppable power of love. The mansion, once a place of cold formality and silent grief, now pulsed with life, yet it carried within it the weight of unseen tensions. Every corridor, every chamber bore witness to the subtle transformations that had begun with the quiet presence of Elena, the humble cleaning woman who had entered their lives unannounced and changed everything. The boy, who had once recoiled at the touch of others and existed within a bubble of isolation and fear, now thrived under her guidance. His laughter echoed like sunlight through the halls, unrestrained and joyous, a sound that both filled and healed the spaces that had long been hollow. The millionaire watched her every move with a fascination that bordered on obsession. He could not deny what she had accomplished, yet he was tormented by the implications. She was a servant, a woman of modest means, yet she possessed a power over his household and, more importantly, over his son's heart, that no wealth or authority could replicate. He had spent years building walls around himself and his child, believing that protection could only be bought or imposed, and now he saw, with both awe and a growing sense of helplessness, that she had dismantled those walls with nothing but love, patience, and unwavering courage. Elena moved through the mansion with the ease of one who belonged not because of her station, but because of the truth of her presence. She spoke softly, smiled gently, and acted decisively, earning the trust of the boy and, gradually, the reluctant admiration of the man who had once dismissed her entirely. Yet the millionaire's pride was not easily subdued. He struggled to reconcile the undeniable results of her care with the social and personal expectations that had defined his life. How could he, a man accustomed to control and hierarchy, accept that someone he had considered beneath notice had done what he could not? One afternoon, the boy, brimming with newfound energy and curiosity, ran into the study, clutching a small wooden model he had built. "Look, father," he exclaimed, eyes shining. "I made it myself." The millionaire looked down at the delicate construction, marveling at the precision and creativity it displayed. Yet it was not the model that caught his attention. It was the look of joy and pride on his son's face, a look mirrored in Elena's expression as she knelt beside him, quietly encouraging and praising every careful movement. His chest tightened. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. It was she, not he, who had nurtured this joy, this confidence, this love. He left the room abruptly, the weight of his emotions pressing heavily upon him. Outside, he paced the halls, struggling to regain control over feelings that defied logic or reason. He understood now that wealth could not command love, nor could power enforce loyalty. This woman had done what he never could, and he felt simultaneously gratitude, fear, and a growing undeniable attraction he dared not name. Days turned into nights, and the mansion's rhythm evolved around Elena's presence. The servants whispered among themselves, noting the subtle authority she now held, not as a threat, but as the heart of the household. She did not seek recognition, yet her influence permeated every action, every corner, every quiet moment. The boy's laughter became the pulse of the house, a signal that the impossible had been achieved. A child once broken was now thriving, guided by love and care that no amount of money could replace. The millionaire found himself increasingly drawn into moments of observation. He would pause outside the nursery, watching her patience, her attentiveness, her unwavering dedication. He noted the way she soothed his son's fears with gentle words and reassuring gestures, how she celebrated his smallest victories, and how she stood resolute when he faltered or cried. Every detail of her actions chipped away at the walls of pride he had constructed over decades, yet the struggle within him deepened. The more he recognized her value, the more he feared his own vulnerability. He had lived a life of control, of certainty, of unchallenged authority. Now, confronted with a force of love and courage he could neither command nor deny, he felt powerless and terrified. He wrestled with conflicting emotions: admiration, gratitude, longing, fear, and a slowly growing realization that he had underestimated the power of the human heart. One night, a violent storm swept through the estate. Rain pounded against the windows, wind howled through the corridors, and the boy, startled by the tempest, began to cry. Elena, with instinctive bravery, gathered him into her arms and calmed him with a combination of gentle words, lullabies, and unwavering presence. The millionaire arrived moments later, witnessing the scene from the doorway. His heart ached with awe and guilt. This woman, who had entered his life humbly and quietly, had become the anchor for his child, the embodiment of love and courage he had long failed to provide. In the weeks that followed, the transformation continued. The boy's laughter became more confident, his steps bolder, his words more assured. Elena's influence extended beyond care. She inspired curiosity, courage, and joy, shaping not just behavior, but the very essence of his character. The millionaire observed, learned, and slowly, unwillingly, began to feel the stirrings of humility and respect. He saw the limits of his own control, the futility of wealth without love, the power of a heart that gave freely and without expectation. Yet, even as the boy thrived, and Elena's quiet authority permeated the mansion, tension lingered. The millionaire grappled with social expectations, the potential judgment of peers, and the fear of his own feelings. How could he, a man of his position, fully embrace someone so far removed from his world? And yet, every moment he witnessed, the boy's laughter, the tender interactions, the quiet miracles performed daily, dissolved his resistance bit by bit. The stage was set for the final shift. The boy had found his mother, in Elena, a mother in every sense of the word, even if not by blood. Elena had become indispensable, the soul of the household, a figure of love and courage whose presence transformed all around her. And the millionaire, though unaware of the full extent of his own emotional journey, stood at the precipice of surrender, of acceptance, of a profound realization that love, humble and unassuming, could conquer pride, fear, and years of self-imposed isolation. The mansion awaited the inevitable revelation, the moment when all hearts would align, when the bonds forged through patience, courage, and devotion would culminate in a transformation that no wealth, status, or power could ever achieve. The boy slept peacefully, the woman rested beside him, and the man lingered in the shadows, bracing for a future that promised both the challenge of surrender and the joy of a love that had already begun to reshape every corner of his life. The final act had not yet arrived, but the foundation had been laid. Every laugh, every whispered word, every gentle touch had built a world within the mansion where love, courage, and humility triumphed quietly but irrevocably. And though the ultimate conclusion remained unseen, the path was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The mansion stood in an almost sacred stillness, the calm before a storm of emotion that would inevitably sweep through its walls. The boy, now a lively child with laughter that rang like crystal bells, had transformed from a fragile, sorrowful soul into a beacon of life and curiosity. Yet beneath this surface of joy, the threads of tension, pride, and unspoken emotion wove a complex tapestry. Every glance the millionaire cast toward Elena, every silent observation of her with his son, was a battle between desire, admiration, guilt, and fear. A war waged silently in the corridors of a house that had once known only control and grief. Elena moved through the rooms with a quiet purpose, each action deliberate, yet infused with care. Her presence was a force of nature, subtle, gentle, yet undeniably powerful. She soothed the boy's anxieties, encouraged his explorations, guided his creativity, and celebrated every small victory with a warmth that melted the coldest corners of the mansion. And everywhere she went, the echoes of her influence reshaped the hearts of all who observed her, particularly the man who had once dismissed her entirely. The millionaire found himself walking the halls at all hours, often lingering near the nursery or the garden where Eleanor and his son played. He watched, mesmerized, as she knelt to tie tiny shoelaces, brushed stray hair from the boy's forehead, or whispered encouragement as he stumbled over a task. It was not just skill or patience that impressed him, it was the depth of her devotion, the fearless love she radiated without expectation or demand. His chest tightened, a mixture of awe and longing that he could neither deny nor control, yet fear clung to him like a shadow. How could he, a man of wealth, status, and careful, reconcile these feelings with the world he inhabited? To admit admiration, or worse, affection, for someone so far removed from his life would be to shatter every carefully maintained boundary. And yet, every day, every moment, he saw the truth before him. She had become the axis on which his son's happiness turned, and in turn she had begun to shift the very axis of his own heart. One late evening, the boy, exhausted from play but unwilling to sleep, clung to Elena's side. "Stay with me," he whispered, his small voice trembling with lingering fear from the day. She knelt beside him, wrapping him in her arms, murmuring soft reassurances that seemed to hold the entire world in their cadence. The millionaire watched from the doorway, the shadows of the room playing across his conflicted face. His heart ached with a new, strange sensation, a recognition of the irreplaceable role she had come to play in all their lives. He recalled the long months of distance and grief, the sleepless nights, the emptiness that had haunted him and his son alike. All of it seemed to dissolve in the presence of this woman who had so effortlessly rebuilt what had been broken. And yet the realization also brought a surge of fear. To surrender, emotionally, fully and without reservation, would demand more than pride or reason could bear. It would require a courage he had never known. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion's atmosphere continued to transform. Servants no longer whispered. They watched quietly, acknowledging the authority Elena commanded not through status, but through an invisible, undeniable force. The boy thrived, exploring the world with courage and curiosity. He painted, built, ran, laughed, and shared secrets with her, all the while unaware of the profound effect their interactions had on the man who observed from the shadows. The millionaire's inner turmoil deepened. He noticed the small things, how the boy's eyes sparkled at Elena's smile, how his small hands sought her guidance without hesitation, how every expression of joy, fear, or discovery was met with unwavering patience and love. He saw himself reflected in her care, recognizing his own failures and coldness, and for the first time he questioned whether wealth, authority, or control could ever equal the power of true devotion. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred. The boy tripped on a step and fell, scraping his knee. He cried out, startled and in pain, and Elena rushed to his side, her hands gentle, her voice soft yet commanding, soothing him, cleaning the wound, and offering comfort that went beyond mere words. The millionaire, who had watched from the hallway, felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. Relief, gratitude, awe, and a strange, unfamiliar longing collided within him. She had not only protected his son's physical safety, but had also nurtured his emotional resilience in ways he could never have imagined. As the days passed, the boundaries of their household continued to shift imperceptibly. The millionaire found himself increasingly drawn into shared moments, quiet breakfasts, walks in the garden, subtle conversations where Eleanor's insight, humility, and intelligence shone brilliantly. He began to see her not merely as a caretaker, but as the glue holding the fractured family together, the quiet force that restored joy and stability. And yet, despite the clarity of her importance, he hesitated. Pride, fear, and societal expectations waged constant war against the undeniable truth in his heart. Night after night, he watched them, Elena reading to his son, playing, laughing, or comforting him during storms, and he realized that he could no longer deny the profound impact she had. Every smile, every word, every gesture was a testament to a force far stronger than wealth, far more enduring than status, the transformative power of love. Yet still, the ultimate act of surrender remained elusive. He had witnessed miracles within his home, felt the invisible threads of devotion and courage intertwine his family's lives, and yet he hesitated at the precipice of fully acknowledging what had already taken place. Elena, meanwhile, remained focused on her sacred duties, unaware of the magnitude of her influence.